Welcome to the Morning Walk with Murdy Digital Stroll. So I want you to imagine that your main work computer completely dies today, like just total hardware failure, panic sets in, you run out, you buy a new machine, you install your ultra-secure web browser, you punch in your 24-word backup phrase, and the system permanently locks you out.
Oh man, that is the ultimate nightmare scenario right there.
Right. Everything you've worked on is just gone. And today we are exploring why that kind of top-tier digital security might actually be your biggest operational nightmare.
Yeah, and before we get too far down that rabbit hole, I want to quickly bring up this document I was reviewing over the weekend. It's titled The Opera Brave Doppelbrain Littlebird Implementation.pdf. And honestly, reading through it, it really didn't feel like slogging through some dry IT manual.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, it felt more like catching a spark of inspiration from a fellow traveler on this road to better digital architecture. I really deeply appreciate it.
It really is a fantastic resource. And honestly, that spark is the entire reason we're sitting here today. Because for this Gurukul session, our mission isn't just to, read off a list of software recommendations.
Exactly. That's not what we do here.
No, we are looking through what we call the digital prism. We really want to extract the underlying legacy code of Project Antaryami.
And of course, the mind behind that incredibly intricate architecture is lead architect Murdy BVNS. What we're really unpacking today is his 25-year philosophy on managing digital workflows, securing data, and, effectively scaling teams.
So if you are listening to this right now and you manage a remote workforce, or maybe you juggle multiple freelance clients, or honestly, if you just feel completely paralyzed by having like 70 open browser tabs across 3 different monitors.
This is a lot of us, let's be real.
It is. But this digital stroll is built specifically for you. We're walking that really delicate tightrope between locking down your infrastructure for security and at the same time cultivating an environment of absolute trust for a remote team.
Right. And to extract that legacy code of Project Antaryami, we need to start at the absolute foundational layer, the factory floor where all modern digital work actually happens, which is the web browser.
Yes, let's definitely talk about that, because lead architect Murdy BVNS went through this fascinating migration journey between 2 major players in the browser space, which are Opera and Brave.
Right.
For decades, Opera was the default engine for his work. But during the pandemic, there was this very strategic switch over to Brave.
And, that initial switch made a lot of sense at the time,
Yeah.
Mostly because of the perks, honestly. Brave is really famous for rewarding users with BAT, or basic attention tokens.
Oh, right, the crypto thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's essentially this small cryptocurrency reward system that basically pays you for viewing their privacy-respecting ads.
But the landscape shifted entirely, right? Because those BP crypto perks, they are no longer available in India. And more importantly, Murdy's primary time sink shifted heavily toward podcast production and distribution.
Right, which completely changes the technical requirements.
Exactly. And with that specific workflow, a massive, totally hidden operational risk emerged with Brave.
Yeah, the sync fragility. And this is a crucial concept to grasp. Brave's sync architecture is, without a doubt, undeniably secure, but we really have to look at how it achieves that security.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, Brave doesn't use a traditional cloud server where you just, log in with an email and password to access your bookmarks. It uses a cryptographic sync chain that's tied to the actual physical devices you currently have active.
Wait, so it's not storing a master copy of my passwords in some central cloud vault somewhere?
No, not at all. And that is brilliant for privacy because there is no central honeypot for hackers to breach. But it assumes you always have at least one device online to approve a new one.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. Treats sync codes as short-lived by design. So if your main PC crashes, which is the exact moment you need to back up the most, and you try to restore your Brave profile using an old sync code, the system often just rejects it. The cryptographic chain is broken.
Wow. That is terrifying for business continuity. I kind of think of Brave's sync architecture like a relay race.
Okay, yeah.
If you drop the baton even once, you aren't just penalized, you are permanently disqualified from the entire race. Which kind of makes me ask a serious question about utility here. If an advanced tool is so hyper-secure that it literally locks the actual owner out during a hardware emergency, is it actually a good productivity tool?
Well, for a casual user, maybe. But for someone running a digital business, no, absolutely not. And that is the exact operational reality that drove the migration back to Opera as the default browser. A restore failure after a PC crash is just an unacceptable risk when you are dealing with client deliverables and research indexing and, managing virtual assistants.
But let's push back on Opera for a second here, because we just talked about prioritizing security, and choosing Opera definitely comes with its own heavy baggage from the privacy community.
That's very true.
Yeah, the chatter always points back to 2016 when Opera was acquired by a Chinese consortium, Kunlun Tech, I think, which had ties to Qihoo 360.
Right, and that acquisition raises totally legitimate governance and data routing questions. If we look at this objectively through the digital prism, it is a highly valid trust model debate. Plus, you have to factor in the cross-barking vulnerability that was patched in Opera back in 2025.
I saw that in the notes. Cross-barking sounds like a terrible dog training method, honestly. But what actually is it?
Right. Well, in simple terms, it was a technical flaw where malicious browser extensions could essentially bark commands across the protective sandbox boundaries that are supposed to keep your tabs separate.
Yikes, so they could talk to each other.
Exactly. An extension in one tab could trick another tab into handing over restricted data. Now, that was patched, just as vulnerabilities are constantly patched in any Chromium-based browser, but it definitely adds to the security debate.
Okay, so how does the legacy code reconcile this? Why migrate back to a browser with a known governance debate and recent sandbox vulnerabilities?
Because context dictates the tool. You really have to look at the decision matrix. The content being produced in this specific workflow, we're talking podcast transcripts, show notes, public research, it's all public anyway.
Oh, right.
Lead architect Murdy BVNS determined that the immediate catastrophic operational risk of a failed Brave sync far outweighs the theoretical unproven risk of data routing concerns with Opera. You aren't handling classified state secrets here. You are publishing public podcasts.
Okay, yeah, that logic definitely holds up. But returning to Opera wasn't completely seamless, was it? There was a highly specific, very frustrating technical hurdle regarding text rendering, specifically for the Telugu language.
Oh yeah, this is a major issue for content creators who work in multiple languages. Opera is a Chromium-based browser, which means it's built on the exact same underlying open-source engine that powers Chrome and Edge. And Chromium historically really struggles with complex text shaping for index scripts.
When you say text shaping, you mean like how the letters actually appear physically on the screen?
Precisely. When you type in English, letters just sit neatly next to each other. But in index scripts, like Telugu, consonants and vowel signs have to physically merge and shift their shape depending on the exact sequence.
I think the browser gets confused by that.
Yeah, Chromium's default font renderer often panics when trying to assemble these conjuncts, and it just spits out broken, garbled characters.
Which is non-negotiable when podcast production is your main focus. I mean, you can't have garbled text in your show notes, so what was the actual fix?
The solution extracted from the legacy code is brilliant because it stops trying to fix the browser itself and fixes the foundation instead. It addresses the font fallback system at the operating system level.
Oh, interesting.
You install Google's Noto Sans Telugu font system-wide on Windows, overriding the default OS font. And crucially, you ensure that the websites being built properly declare their language using the HTML taglang equals T.
Because if you don't use that tag, the browser just does a generic font search and fails.
Exactly. It tells the browser exactly which rendering rules to apply.
Okay, so we have our foundational layer. Opera is locked in, the sync is reliable, and the Telugu fonts are rendering beautifully. But because it works so perfectly, a brand new problem emerges. Murdy is now doing all his podcast production, his client projects, and his personal administration in this one single browser.
Right, which is a lot of overlapping data.
Exactly. How do we prevent all that data from bleeding into a chaotic mess?
Well, this brings us to a major illusion in modern browser design. Opera has a very popular feature called Workspaces. If you use it, visually, it looks like you are separating your work. You click a little briefcase icon on the sidebar, and boom, you get a fresh, clean set of tabs for clients. You click a microphone icon, you get a separate set of tabs for podcast.
And if you are listening to this right now and you use something similar, you might really want to check how it actually functions under the hood. Because aren't visual separators like Workspaces just tricking our brains into thinking our digital identities are secure?
They absolutely are. It is purely visual trickery. You are essentially putting up a curtain in the middle of a room, but you are still standing in the exact same room. Workspaces share the exact same underlying profile.
Wait, so the cookies and everything are shared?
Yes. That means they share the same cookies, the same logged-in sessions, and the same passwords.
So if I have a client's corporate social media account open in my client workspace and my personal, highly opinionated social media account open in my personal workspace, the browser actually doesn't know the difference.
It does not. You're literally one accidental click or one confused autofill prompt away from posting a personal rant to a client's corporate feed. It is a massive data bleed risk.
That is a recipe for disaster.
So how does Project Antaryami solve this without abandoning Opera entirely?
Through a fantastic technical workaround found in the source material, instead of relying on native workspaces, the architecture utilizes a custom PowerShell script specifically named setup-opera-profiles.pss1.
Oh, I love a good command line solution. What does this script actually do? Instead of putting up a curtain in the room, this script forces the computer's operating system to build completely separate houses. It uses a command line flag called user-data-dir.
Okay.
When you run the script, it automatically detects your Opera installation and creates distinct, isolated profiles that act like entirely different browsers.
So it basically generates distinct desktop shortcuts. You double-click the shortcut named Opera-Clients, and it launches an instance with its own cookies, its own cache, its own extensions. Then you close it, click Opera-Podcast, and it's a totally separate digital world. Zero data bleed.
Correct. But there is a significant trade-off for that level of isolation. Because these profiles are isolated at the hard drive directory level, they do not automatically sync with each other. If you bookmark a great research article in the client's profile, it will not magically appear in the podcast profile.
That makes sense. So the strategy here is to keep your main default Opera profile for cross-machine syncing and treat these isolated shortcut profiles as local, dedicated workstations for deep work.
Which is a perfect setup for a single individual. But Project Antaryami isn't just one person, right? It is designed to scale to a global team of virtual assistants working on different machines across different time zones.
And that requires a major infrastructure upgrade. To manage this ecosystem, the architecture details a migration to Google Pro Workspace under the domain antaryamiindia.org. This is a huge leap forward in professionalizing the setup.
It really is. And notice the strategic choice in how they configure the accounts. They deliberately avoid using personal VA names, like John at antaryamiindia.org. Instead, they use role-based domain emails, like clients at or podcast at.
That is such a vital piece of the legacy code. The browser profile belongs to the task, not the person.
Exactly.
If a freelancer moves on to a different project or leaves the organization entirely, the profile, the bookmarks, and the history stay perfectly intact for the next person rotating into that role. It completely eliminates identity sprawl.
But integrating Google Workspace with Opera introduces a really fascinating security blind spot.
I was wondering about this. Because if we are handing over these role-based Opera accounts to different freelancers around the world, there has to be a catch.
The catch is how Opera handles its sync sessions. Let's say you are the administrator, and a VA leaves unexpectedly. You need to revoke their access immediately. So you log into the Google Workspace admin panel, and you change the password for clients at antaryamiindia.org. You might think you've locked them out.
Wait, have I not?
You have locked them out of Gmail, yes. But you have not automatically logged that account out of the Opera browser sync on the VA's local machine.
Are you serious?
Yep. Opera's sync token gets stored locally in the browser's hidden system files. The local browser still has a valid handshake with Opera servers, even if the underlying Google password is changed.
Wow. So they could potentially still see new bookmarks being added by the next VA. That sounds like a massive administrative bottleneck. We are giving freelancers the keys to the castle, but we are holding on to a clunky, highly manual kill switch. To truly cut access, the admin has to remotely wipe the local profile folder on the original machine.
Well, or use a remote sign-out feature within Opera itself. But yes, it requires a secondary manual action. It is a vulnerability, but by documenting it in the legacy code, it becomes a standard operating procedure rather than a midnight crisis.
Fair enough. But there is another danger with scaling this ecosystem, and that's concurrency. What happens if two virtual assistants log into the exact same role-based Opera account at the same time?
The system issues a very specific, bolded warning against doing this. Opera's sync engine is not built for concurrent, live, collaborative editing like a Google Doc. It uses a last save wins logic.
Meaning if two VAs are working simultaneously on different laptops and they both try to save a password or reorganize the bookmark folders,
You get silent overwrites.
Yeah.
One person's work will simply erase the others without any warning prompt whatsoever. It works beautifully for sequential handoffs, like one VA finishes their shift, logs out, and the next logs in. But the architecture breaks down entirely if they work concurrently.
Okay, let's step back and look at the whole picture here. We have built these isolated houses, a podcast profile, a client profile, a personal profile. We have role-based access for the team, and we understand the sync limitations.
Right.
But if we have all these separate silos, how on earth do we maintain a cohesive history of our research? If I read a brilliant article in the client's browser on Tuesday, but I need it for a podcast episode on Thursday, I do not want to dig through 3 different browser histories to find it.
And this is where Project Antaryami introduces a total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
They don't try to force the isolated browsers to share their history. They sidestep native browser sync entirely using a third-party extension called Doppelbrain.
Doppelbrain, I have to say, I really love the branding on that.
It's highly descriptive. Doppelbrain acts as a separate, overarching, unified memory layer. You install the extension into every single isolated Opera profile. As you read articles and research topics, Doppelbrain quietly watches. It builds its own independent, highly searchable record of your cognitive activity, completely divorced from Opera's internal sync mechanisms.
I want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. Instead of asking 3 different physical libraries to constantly share and update their massive card catalogs, Doppelbrain is like hiring a personal stenographer to hover directly above you. They quietly write down the title of every book you open, regardless of which library you happen to be sitting in at the time.
That is the perfect analogy. You get one unified, searchable memory, no matter which isolated profile you're actually using.
Now, looking through the technical specs, I did notice one specific hurdle regarding Doppelbrain. There is a strict 2-month limit on importing past browser history.
Yes, when you first install the extension, you could only pull your history back about 60 days. The source material analyzes this and suggests it's either a hard import cap built into Doppelbrain itself, which is very common for these tools, to manage cloud database sizes and comply with GDPR, or it's just a local retention limit within Opera.
Oh, like if you clear your cache.
Exactly. If you run routine disk cleanup tools, your browser simply might not have data older than 2 months to hand over.
But the legacy code solution to this is entirely forward-looking, isn't it? The fix is to stop worrying about the past and install the Doppelbrain extension right now into every profile going forward. The 2-month gap is just a one-time backfill problem. Once the extension is running, it captures your live history permanently.
Exactly. You lay the foundation today for the memory you will need tomorrow. And this concept of a unified memory layer leads us directly into the most profound and perhaps the most controversial part of Project Antaryami. We're moving from the software architecture to the human architecture.
Right, how these tools are actually deployed to the human beings sitting at the keyboards.
Yes. This is what lead architect Murty BVNS calls Gurukul 2.0. It is the culmination of a quarter-century of experience in preserving digital assets and managing people. And the entire philosophy rests on one radical principle: trading over surveillance.
That is a massive departure from how remote work is managed in the corporate world today. I mean, usually remote work means extreme micromanagement.
It really does.
Yeah.
But here, the virtual assistants are freelancers. They work on their own personal machines from the comfort of their own homes. There's absolutely zero desktop monitoring software installed.
None.
None. There are no keystroke loggers. There are no tools randomly taking screenshots of their monitors every 10 minutes. The organization extends total trust and asks them to self-manage.
Okay, I have to challenge that. It sounds utopian, sure, but from an operational standpoint, how do you develop a team's skills or catch mistakes if you literally cannot see what they're doing all day?
That is where the synergy between Doppelbrain and a second tool called Littlebird comes in. They split the training problem entirely in half. Doppelbrain acts as the show me what actually happened layer.
The stenographer we talked about earlier?
Yes. The source document describes Doppelbrain as a GoldenEye project. Now, in corporate tech terms, a GoldenEye dashboard usually refers to a high-level surveillance view for management. But here, the perspective is entirely flipped. It is a private dashboard for the VA's own eyes only.
Oh, so they check themselves.
Exactly. Because there are no managerial activity logs, if a VA gets lost on a complex research assignment, They can query their own Doppelbrain history. They can ask the system, what tabs was I in when I got stuck 30 minutes ago? It turns digital asset management into an automatic self-correcting skill rather than a discipline they have to be punished into learning.
So the tool provides self-awareness, not managerial oversight. That is incredibly powerful. And what about the second tool, Littlebird?
Littlebird is the practice and get evaluated layer. It doesn't just grade a multiple choice test, it uses advanced AI language models to actively role-play real-world scenarios with the VA.
Like a simulation.
Yeah. The AI can be prompted to act like a highly demanding defense lawyer trying to pressure test a specific claim the VA researched. Or it can act like a confused stakeholder asking difficult, out-of-left-field questions. The VA practices defending their work in a safe, simulated environment.
And the output of that AI roleplay is a text transcript.
Exactly. The transcript itself becomes the coaching artifact. A senior team member can sit down, review the transcript with the VA, and see exactly where their logic held up and where they missed key details, all without ever needing to hover over their shoulder or sit in on a live browser session.
I am fascinated by the psychology of this. If you have zero activity logs, no screenshot monitors, and no mandatory protocols, how do you verify the tools are actually being used? You're essentially forcing the software to earn its adoption through sheer daily utility rather than corporate enforcement.
You just articulated the exact genius of Gurukul 2.0. The software must sell itself. If it isn't useful, it gets abandoned. The curriculum operates on a strict recommend, don't mandate two-tier system.
Walk me through those two tiers. How does it work for a brand new hire versus a veteran?
For junior VAs, during their onboarding process, Doppelbrain and Littlebird are introduced as strong default recommendations. It provides them with sensible digital scaffolding so they don't have to figure out asset management from scratch. It hands them the safety net that took the lead architect 25 years of trial and error to refine.
But they aren't actually forced to use it. And what about the senior VAs?
Senior VAs are treated as an asset, not a compliance target. They have total operational freedom. If a senior VA is already an expert in personal productivity and they have built a bespoke system on their own device that works better for them, they are not pulled off it just for the sake of corporate uniformity.
Wow, that's rare.
In fact, their custom workflows might even be studied and fed back into the academy to teach newer cohorts.
That is a remarkable framework. It completely sidesteps the trust deficit that infects so many remote companies today. Total operational freedom, strict freelancer privacy, and highly effective training are all coexisting without contradiction.
So as we step back and synthesize the legacy code we've extracted today through the digital prism, we see that Project Antaryami is about so much more than debating the merits of Opera versus Brave, or, writing PowerShell scripts to isolate browser profiles.
Right. The browser scripts, the domain emails, the AI extensions, those are just the mechanical gears.
The true legacy is a holistic architecture that deliberately isolates digital risk, using tools like role-based accounts and local profile directories specifically so it can maximize human freedom and autonomous skill building. It secures the data at the foundational level so it never has to police the people at the management level.
Securing the data so you don't have to police the people, that is a brilliant way to encapsulate the entire philosophy. And that brings us to the end of our stroll today. But before we go, I want to leave you listening right now with a final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
Think deeply about your own digital setup, whether it's just you managing your personal life or maybe a large team you manage at work. We spend so much of our time and budget looking for tools that will force us or force our teams to be productive. We look for website blockers, time trackers, and mandatory logging systems. But if you adopted the Gurukul 2.0 philosophy today, if you removed all surveillance, deleted all the tracking software, and dropped all mandates, would the productivity tools you currently use actually survive on their own merit? Would you keep using them because they genuinely make your work better, or are you just using them because you feel like you have to?
A highly challenged question for all of us to consider.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this digital stroll through the architecture of Project Antaryami. Until next time, keep looking through the prism.